Good afternoon, all. We welcome you all to the second session of the day. And I'm happy to introduce the resource person for the session, Dr. Dhanya Bhaskaran. Dr. Dhanya Bhaskaran has been actively engaged in the field of teacher empowerment and corporate training for the past 16 years. Dr. Bhaskaran is specialized in English language teaching, language skills development, business skills development, soft skills development, teacher empowerment, KG teacher empowerment, and storytelling. She is currently working in Macmillan Education, India, as Education Product Manager in Kerala region. She was associated with eminent MNCs and NGOs like TCS, APF, and RELO. She supports schools in curriculum planning, academic course designing, syllabus selection, and course designing. She has authored novels, novellas, and poems in various leading magazines, newspapers, and e-magazines. The urge to experiment in the field of education keeps her active, and the determination to support the rural education sector in the country boosts her spirit. Happy to have you amidst us, ma'am. May I now request you to take over the session on the topic, Death of a Teacher, Teaching, Reading in the Classroom today. Thank you, ma'am. Over to you.
Thank you. And good afternoon, dear educators. I hope now I will get access to my presentation. Great. Thank you very much. And good afternoon once again. I would like to tell a story today, a story of an accident. And before moving on with my story, I'd like to start with the session flow. I have some background that I have to share about my story. And my story is about an action research in which I'm currently involved. It's in the evolving stage. And whatever stages I have gone through, I can share with you. The steps and the strategies that were used during that course, I'm planning to share them as well with you. And it's too early to talk about any findings, but of course I have learned something which would be part of the session. And I look forward to hearing from you to clear my way forward, because I think I'm traveling in a road which is not taken much. So a road not traveled is lying in front of me, or a road less traveled is lying in front of me. Death of a teacher, it's actually about my own death. It has nothing to do with any other teacher. Well, I died as a teacher almost 4 months ago. And that death happened when I tried to teach some UG students reading and understanding, comprehending, and constructing meanings out of a book called An Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway. And my classroom comprises 20 undergraduate students from the tribal communities, various tribal communities, who are studying in various colleges in Ernakulam, both government and aided colleges, such as S.H. Devara, Maharajas, etc. And by today, yes, I mean today, during the COVID pandemic days. Now to my story's background, the general background. A news for the educators to feel happy about whatever we have been doing and whatever we have been engaged in, the results of 2018 CBSE board examination. The results of the CBSE examinations might not be very different from the state board examinations or open school examinations, that means NEOS examinations. This is a matter of pride, of course, a whopping 86.7%. With Trivandrum in the first place with 99.60, followed by Chennai 97.37. Wow. I'm not talking about 2020 because of various political reasons, you know that. So let's be apolitical here. And let's be politically correct as well. This result definitely should boost our spirit. Wow, we have done a real good job. And teachers who are teaching in schools, you should pat on your back. Teachers who are teaching in colleges should feel, wow, we are going to get a nice bunch of students this year or in the years to come. I want to take you to one more statistics, and people who know me would be wondering why Dhanya is playing with statistics. She's pathetic with mathematics. Well, sometimes numbers help us to put things in perspective, build clarity to the arguments. This is the report of ASR, a survey conducted every year by one of the largest NGOs in the segment of education in India, which is known as Pradham. So Pradham's ASR report 2018 was about students between the age group of 14 to 18. And this time, there are two results that I would like to project in front of you where you can pay focused attention. The second and the third results with 40% of 18-year-olds who can't read a simple sentence in English. That's cool. And 25% in the 14 to 18 age group can't read basic text in their own language. Wow. And yet, they managed to get this result. Magic. Of course, it's magic. What else can explain it? If you want to go deeper, take a deeper dive, this is the situation with special regard to reading. Couple of years back, ASR conducts surveys every year. So this is, I think, 2016-17 survey-based result. Just 11% of students in class 1 can read a class 1 text, and 15% can read age-appropriate textbooks or paragraphs, to be precise. Even by the time they are in class 8, 27% can't read class 2's text. Slight improvement over the past years. That's my anticipatory bail here. If this is the truth, then this is the reality as well. And these statistics, they are my large background. And to come to the specific, I would like to introduce you to this. Before moving on to my specific background, I would like to take you through a sample question based on which ASR has come up with this kind of a result. This is the sample of a question paper on reading, which ASR conducted among students of almost all the major states across India. And this is ASR is a household survey, which is conducted based on the random sampling method. So they have covered urban, semi-urban, rural, and tribal areas as well. So the students would have been given a short story. Those who couldn't attempt that were exposed to a small paragraph. Even that's not working, then they would give them random words or sometimes even random letters in the alphabet. And ASR didn't consider it only as a survey mechanism. They are also doing continuous student support programs, academic support programs. So they track or monitor the students' levels continuously. And this is a sample of a report which they keep with them to understand how the students move from baseline to midpoint and final throughout the year, whether they are moving from the letter to the words or from the words to the paragraphs or from the paragraphs to the story. Please keep that as the background, large background, and let's now take a dive to the specific one. This is students from an NGO called Adishakti, which is supporting students of tribal villages or tribal communities to cope with the education system to which they are exposed when they move to the larger towns or higher education institutions. So these students, they have all studied in various schools across the state. Almost all of them are coming from districts like Idukki, Wayanad, Palakkad, Trivandrum, and Malappuram, with a vast majority of tribal students studying in their schools, in those schools. And with COVID, these students were stuck in hostels because if they go back to their native places, they couldn't access range, they couldn't access online teaching and learning. So they all stayed in various hostels in Ernakulam, and Adishakti was coordinating their education support programs. Now I have to talk about the accident about which, from where I started the study. It happened so that my friend who was working closely with Adishakti gave me a ring almost 4 months back and asked me, Dhanya, can you support some students to clear their examinations? They are supposed to write their examination in another 2 months. And I asked, what kind of students? They said, it's just undergraduate students, degree first year, second year, and third year. I said, okay, no problem. And how many books? Maybe 2 or 3, that's it. Part 1 English, okay, not a big deal. And she also said that they're all from tribal background. They need some extra support in English because you know how it is. I said, okay, I know how it is because I've been working in the rural sector for some time now. It's my area of interest. I happily agreed. And that's where it all started. I have to introduce you to my students now. So let's meet the students. There are more than 35, I guess, around 35 students in my batch. 20 of them were undergraduate students. Some others, they were in +2, some others in the PG segment. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about only the 20 students. They all studied in Mahatma Gandhi University, various colleges under Mahatma Gandhi University, like S.H. Devara or Maharaja's College, etc. Arts and science colleges, age group 17 to 23, all of them from marginalized and underprivileged background. And mind you, they are not only just marginalized and underprivileged, they were the backward, wherever in the backward communities under underprivileged background. So example, Paniya, Kattunaikar, Manna, etc. So communities like Kattunaikar, they live mostly inside the forest, deep in the forest. They don't usually venture out to the main society or mainstream society. And all of them, obviously, as you could guess, they are all first generation literates. Of course, they were studying in government medium schools, government Malayalam medium schools, and they have been exposed to English at least for 12 years. That's why I agreed, okay, I can take it up. And I was having this thought in my mind that, yes, I'm doing some noble big deed. It might give me a lot of, pride. I'm doing my bit to support the group which needs a lot of support. I just felt so good about accepting the offer. My confirmation biases versus this. This is stage 1. I am yet not clear about this, but I'm very clear about my confirmation bias. And I have to reiterate, it was my confirmation bias and not my assumptions, not my intuitions, my biases. I got to know from my friend as well as the mentors who were supporting the students that they have all completed SSLC and +2 with reasonably good marks in English. That means 32 to 50% in English. And therefore assumed, or my confirmation bias was, of course, they would be able to read and comprehend basic level language. And they would be able to read and understand some question and maybe answer some questions. They might be needing my help in answering long answer questions, in arranging, in helping. I was planning to help them with the coherence, with the cohesion, arrangement of ideas in a beautiful way, and probably use some synonyms to get rid of the monotony of the same words being used again and again. I was having that thought in my mind. I was planning accordingly. And I also had this bias that they would be able to read and comprehend simple texts, at least, if not age appropriate, at least 4 or 5 dates below what they're expected to understand and comprehend. And I was very confident also that they would be able to communicate in English whatever they have read and understood, at least in bits and pieces, in broken English. I would like to take you to my learnings now. This is my learning. Leave away any complete chapter. They couldn't even read a paragraph age appropriate, neither age appropriate nor 4 grades down. They couldn't even read a paragraph continuously when I gave them text from class 6, which they have studied in their schools. And I asked the students, 20 of them, to read it, and only 4 were willing to read it for me. I was trying to do a pre-test. Well, I got 4 students to help me with the pre-test. The others said, no way, we don't want to read. We can't read. We don't like to read. We don't want to read. I can't push. They are young adult learners. So even though some of them, that means those 4 or 5 students who agreed to read, some of them could read 3-4 sentences together. But when I asked them what's the meaning of what they have read, they didn't understand. So meaning making was completely negative. And they all scored 5 mark or less than 5 marks. Only one person scored 5 marks, and he was a teacher trainee student earlier. He discontinued in between and joined UG. So maybe an year's extra experience in the academic spectrum. My learnings, and I had to then, and I have to tell you that I marked this, I even created a scoring key, which was 10 marks for comprehension if they read and comprehend whatever they were given, and 5 marks for fluency and 5 marks for pronunciation. Altogether, they scored either 5 or less than 5. From there, I progressed to stage 2, where I remained as an outsider, as an observer, and I tried to observe them. I tried to analyze them with the help of the answers, the assignments that they have produced for their internal assessments. And also, I get to talk to the mentors who are supporting these students. They were all volunteers. The mentors were all volunteers from various institutes like TIFF and Azim Premji University, etc. From the mentors and from my own observation and analysis, I came to know that the students, they were not able to engage continuously in reading, not only in English, but also in Malayalam, because they failed to establish any connection with the content. The content that's presented in English textbook as well as in Malayalam textbooks, they couldn't connect with it. And even though it was written in Malayalam, when they used the literary Malayalam, the students couldn't understand or comprehend those words. For example, those who would understand Malayalam, I can I can recite 2 lines which were thrown on them by a Malayalam teacher. This is by a famous Malayalam poet, Kumaranashan, and the lines are, Innu bhasha ita purnam innaho vannu pom pidayum artha shankeyal, which can be roughly translated. Today, language is so vague that even if I use language, I might commit mistakes in meaning. They couldn't understand that Malayalam either. It was Malayalam, but it was an alien language for them. Of course, there was a sheer, there was no context for them that they can relate to in the text. And English, since Malayalam itself was removed from the reality, English was twice removed from the reality, because the students, all of them spoke different tribal languages back at their home, and learning Malayalam itself was like normal student learning English in an Indian circumstances. And the students didn't have any confidence to read English, and sometimes
Ma'am?
In the door.
Ma'am?
Sorry.
Yeah,
I think
is everything fine?
it's everything is fine because I've got a bunch of kids at my home and somebody stepped on my internet. I'm really sorry for that.
Okay, fine, ma'am.
Okay.
Fine.
So can I continue?
Yes, ma'am. Please,
Okay.
please.
COVID pandemic, the students are feeling lonely and I've got to invite a set of kids at my home. And that's what happens when you have kids who are not given any supervision. Sorry for that. Okay. So I was yelling at them. I'm really sorry. And okay, so I was talking about what I learned as an observer. Check here. So I was talking about the problems that I faced when I started this journey. And when I started the journey, I was thinking that it was an easy job. I could do my job in a week or two. But I understood that if I remain as an outsider, I would not be able to help any of my students at all. So I had to kill myself as a teacher and re-merge myself as probably a listener first, a co-learner second, a co-creator third, and a co-traveler fourth. And I'm going to talk about how the journey moved from that stage onwards. Stage 3, death of the teacher. When I interacted with them, I understood that I need to gain their trust. I need to gain their confidence. So I started talking to them. I kept my helping them reading and understanding and preparing for examination part shelved for some time. When I interacted them, I understood that they never felt any purpose. There was no purpose. There was no felt need to read at all. Without reading, they could clear the examinations, which was the only need which was projected in front of them as students throughout all these years. Good enough. There's no reason for them to read. And naturally, they could not establish any connection either. Now, learning activities that were supposed to involve the students cognitively and also connect them emotionally with the content, they never received them in the conventional, regular classroom teaching and learning methods that were used throughout all these years. That means a decade and 2 years, more than that, yes. And texts that were given to them, most of them were far removed from their reality. The monotonous, boring teaching strategies, you can guess how it would have been. Those strategies never inspired the children to read. And what is more embarrassing or worrying for me was they were all adult learners, and nowhere in their journey as a student, they received any sort of intrinsic or extrinsic motivation, leave-away motivation. They lacked proper appreciation. 7,000 days roughly spent in the system without much appreciation or recognition. Quite saddening a reality. Once I learned and once I came out of my biases, I started to explore further. And at this stage, that is stage 4, my mission was to gain their trust and acceptance. For that, I took this changed role of a listener, a co-learner, and a co-traveler or co-creator. So to earn the trust, I had to start with baby steps. First, I started to listen to them. Listening to them helped me to listen to their voices as well, and that naturally prompted me to accept their voices and give room for their voices. For the first time, I was told by some of my students that somebody asked them what they feel in the classroom. And when I listened to some of the students, majority remained silent. And that also was a learning for me. Once I started to appreciate them and appreciate their struggles, they started to open up and they talked. about what they want from me. The first time I received a right input towards planning my teaching reading sessions with them. They said that they need something that they can relate to understand the text. They have already been taught the text by their teachers for almost a month and a half before I joined them. And the examinations were nearing. I had only hardly a month and a half with me by then. And I had to help the entire 20 of them to go through 120 pages long Old Man and the Sea. These 18-year-old, 20-year-old students, they saw their first experience with sea was when they reached Ernakulam from their hilly mountain terrains for the first time when they turned 18. How can I help the children understand the struggle of Santiago with a marlin when they don't even know what exactly a sea is? So I had to start designing different techniques, tools that will suit the learning needs, the styles of the different learners. And also I had to provide different types of opportunities for open discussions and debates. I learned it from them. And once I understood their needs and their demands, probably I started coming up with materials that might meet their demands. And this is my dream. This is where I want to travel with them. My students are right now not with me. They are back in the forests, in their hamlets, in their villages. Many of them have gone into deeper forest for cultivation. They will be back next week. I'm crossing my fingers and waiting because I don't know where they have reached. They have written their examinations and left the place. I'm not quite sure how many of them will be able to successfully come out, successfully manage the examination. However, I would like to move forward with an aim to empower them to be independent explorers with any text provided to them and view the text from their perspective, not the perspective of the teacher, not the perspective that's given in the guidebooks, but from their own perspective. I would also like to give voice to their thoughts that they gain from their engagement with the text. I will not voice it, they will have to voice it. And my aim, my ambition is to trigger creative and constructive engagements with texts, whatever text that they are going to read in future, and help them to attain confidence in approaching reading materials in English other than textbooks, and probably at least create a positive feeling towards reading. These are my dreams, my goals for the coming days. And now I would like to elaborate on the techniques and tools. I'm not depending too much on my PPT for that, but I can tell you from my heart. One of the best methods that worked with students who had an aversion towards reading, discussion. When they were able to tell their stories, when I could find audience to listen to their stories, they were ready to tell the stories. The stories have to be first told. It was narrated. And then slowly, I translated their stories into English and anonymously I shared them among the students. They narrated in Malayalam. I rewrote it in English and I shared and I asked them to find out whose story it is. There is a felt need. They started to read. Of course, not much comprehension came initially, but they were at least ready to explore the text. Must have been their first, purposeful engagement with any text, I guess. Because they had to listen to the stories that were told to them. They had to identify the story and figure out to whom it was told and by whom it was told. Another option was designing a concept map. For this, I had to start with the abridged and simple abridged version of Old Man and the Sea. I had to start telling or narrating the story to them. They wouldn't read. Even now, none of them read Old Man and the Sea. After a month and a half long effort, none of them read Old Man and the Sea completely. But they were ready to read the abridged version. And then we made a concept map, an event map out of their understanding of the story. Each student had his or her own concept map. And they all differed slightly from each other. Another technique that we used in the classroom, which probably saw some positive results in developing a better attitude towards approaching the text, was I encouraged them to draw whatever they have heard and whatever they have read. So when they drew the pictures, the events, then they started to establish some sort of a connection, a personal connection with the text. And I asked them to talk about the text first. The students started to talk about different scenes that they drew on the pages. Each one had his or her own favorite scenes. So when these scenes were explicitly narrated with the help of the picture, I then asked them, where exactly is it in the text? I asked the other students to go and find it out in the abridged version. So to find out where it is, they had to read the text. Another technique that I have used was a mix and match program. So I selected certain dialogues from here and there, and I gave the people the names of the speakers and asked them to connect it. So they had to read the dialogues and they had to figure out where it is, and then they started to connecting it. Initially, I thought videos would be a good tool, but videos, they looked at it as an entertainment tool. They used it more or less to figure out the basic outline of the story. They didn't go in detail into the dialogues, or they didn't listen carefully to the rendering of the story in it. They just went through the frames, through the pictures. So videos or animations, actually initially they didn't work. But then when I designed a tool with pre, while, post watching programs incorporated in it, then videos started to work. Also, as I've mentioned earlier, the simplified versions I had to download, and abridged versions I have to download and make it simplified for them. Or even that didn't work initially for that. Therefore, I had to resort to the Malayalam translation to help the students to start reading and taking it seriously. What has happened afterwards? I was very conscious to use the learning skills, the 21st century learning skills, to be part of the teaching learning program. And therefore, each session was planned in such a way that there will be a combination of these skills also involved in teaching reading. So the discussions, the pictures, the videos, the short activities, they all help the students to engage creatively, constructively, collaboratively in interacting with the text. And there was continuous communication as well. The program continued through online-offline combination. Sometimes I used to go and meet them. Sometimes we used to sit online through Zoom or Google Meet. Of course, I was able to help them in improving their literacies, in their media skills also, media literacy, where information, media, and technology literacy were involved. The students were comfortable with TikToks, comfortable with WhatsApps, comfortable with YouTube, but they never bothered to use the technology to gather information or verify or check facts. So that was the challenge. I had to motivate them to use their mobile for some other reason as well, which is reading. Both the traditional and the flipped model of Bloom's taxonomy was used in the class. When, as a co-creator or co-learner, when I started helping them to understand the text, to remember the facts that we were discussed previously, to apply basic understanding into the text, there in my classes, it was the traditional model. And questions were given to them, which they could do together in small groups. Activities were provided, which they can again do in small groups. That time, the analysis, evaluation, and creative levels, programs happened back after the sessions. Flipped model, when I helped the students to read the story, do some homework about the story, certain parts of the story, and when we started the discussions on why do you think that character is like you, or why do you hate that character? Why do you hate the sharks? For example, that was one question. Students said, I don't like the shark. I said, why? Why don't you like the shark? When that kind of discussion started to happen in the classroom, there were debates, there were discussions, then probably the flip model started to evolve in the class. How did I proceed? This is a rough path. I had to create, my aim was to transfer the ownership of learning to my students. I had to start with creating a purpose. I guess at least I was able to do a bit of that. And I also wanted to help the students to explore the text, for which the techniques and the tools helped. Then, to some extent, the students could establish some connection with the book. And that's where we parted our ways. Now it's time for me to think or design new strategies where I could help them to create and co-create, evaluate their own performances, their own movement from where they started till now. And I need to help the students to use their own reflections, their meta thinking, introspection, to see how they have proceeded from where they were and till what they have, wherever they have reached so far. My biggest aim, to inspire them to be autonomous readers. This is where the story ends, the story of my accident ends. And how have I evolved? What has changed in me? Paradigm shifts have definitely happened in me. These are not the paradigm shifts that happened only within me. These are all connected with various theories related to education and second language learning. These theories probably where the fundamentals are based, that proved the fundamental or basics of my study. From the delivery of content, which was my first priority at the initial stage when I took this assignment, my entire focus shifted to the process of learning how they learn. Learning which strategy will be useful for them. So from the product to the process, from the content to the process, a focus shift. Second, from the craft model, which I was planning to adopt at the initial stage, to the reflective model, because every now and then I had to revisit my strategies and change it or modify it or adapt it or adopt it to the needs of the students. From a teacher or a teacher-centric, definitely to a learner, learning-centric. I don't want to harp on it again. And from teaching to co-creation. So instead of teaching them Old Man and the Sea, I ended up co-creating a lot of parallel text. I ended up co-creating a lot of parallel stories, parallel pictures, parallel diagrams, parallel lives. So I was part of a great co-creation experiment. And from the teacher, of course, I traveled as a co-learner, or I changed myself as a co-learner because I had to learn more from them than teach them something. And my book-oriented teaching learning plan, that was an utter failure. So slowly, I had to move towards the experiential learning program, which National Education Policy 2020 has talked so much about. And that actually works in classes where we have students like this. From the rote learning, I had to slowly make them active learners for changing their attitudes towards reading. And my takeaways from my interaction with my students: equality, equity, diversity, and inclusion. The first picture that you are seeing in front of you, that was the reality, or that is the reality. Our education system is offering equal opportunities to everybody. Is that enough? I'm afraid I don't think so. How can we ensure equity? We need to move beyond the regular teaching learning programs that we have been adapting. Is that it? Well, no. Somewhere we need to liberate these learners. Somewhere we need to equip them to move on their own. Somehow we have to transfer the responsibility of learning to them. Somehow we have to equip them to be autonomous learners. To make them readers, we need to empower them to believe in them and believe in the meanings that they made out of these texts. Why did I choose this topic today to discuss with you? Because I wanted to share some extra realities that many of us might not have experienced in lives. These students also matter. These students who learn English as a third language or a fourth language, they're part of our system, our reality. Do we have any special support that will enable them to come out of these problems that they face in their academic life? We need to think. I'm sure there are many researchers, many curriculum developers, many educationists, many academicians in the group. You would be able to look at these points in a broader perspective. You might be able to come up with ideas and strategies that could help these learners as well. Because they are also part of our society, they're also part of our lives, and they're part of our education system. How can we neglect them? How can we not provide them the right amount of support that they deserve, they require? With this, I would like to close the session, and I'm open for discussions. This is the baseline of my my story for the birth of the reader. The birth of the reader must be at the cost of the death of the author. The birth of the learner must be at the cost of the death of the monotonous, boring teacher. Thank you. And that's where my presentation ends. If you have questions, I'm ready to take the questions. I think I finished a bit early than most of the other speakers, and I didn't talk any theory either. I was just sharing a story.
Yeah. Thank you, ma'am, for a very useful, nostalgic session. It was really very useful. Okay, and there's one question from Dr. P. Ramani. A great achievement in getting the students to get interested in reading. Why should you try to align your teaching and learning experience with the so-called 21st century skills and flipped and blended learning? Is it necessary? Hasn't your own experience provided you enough insights into the teaching learning process?
A very deep question, I must say. Of course, as you said, Dr. Ramani, I know it's not necessary to connect it with 21st century skills or with flipped or blended learning. I brought them in here because that is how the convention, the textbooks are actually designed. The textbooks or the curriculum in large, they envision the students to achieve these skills. And textbooks are expected to be the tools that will enable the children to learn the basics of language plus acquire the 21st century skills. That's what the curriculum and the syllabus says. That's why I wanted to push it here or project it here, because the techniques that I used in turn would have helped, I hope, to familiarize with or to empower themselves in certain way in enhancing their 21st century skills as well. However, in my study, they were not my priorities. Never.
Thank you, ma'am. There's another question from Dr. Musmala Vamsi. Students learn much more during small groups instruction. What is the best way to give students small group instructions on a regular basis with a class of 22 students?
Great. I'm not sure whether she wants to or he wants to talk about the online or the offline one. Online one, offline one, we are already familiar with different programs. Online, if you're using programs like Zoom, there are facilities like breakout rooms. They're excellent support for initiating small group discussions among students. However, how do we plan the discussion is the most important one. Planning and execution, that's where the key lies, I guess. That's my experience with these students. We need to give them something that will trigger their involvement. It should push them to be part of the learning process. It should be so compelling that they couldn't sit unless they could complete that particular activity. If we can make them feel that, then any group work will be a success to a great extent. That's what I felt. So giving them the purpose, I guess, is the key to start helping them in reading.
I don't think we have any more questions. Participants, any more questions?
There are chats coming in the box, and okay. I think when we put a lot of chats are coming, I'm finding it slightly difficult to read them.
Okay, I'll read it for you, ma'am. It's from one Mr. Surya. When we put forth out of box, is it acceptable to rural students who start treating teacher as an alien? How to balance them?
Our rural students are way beyond than our imagination. They are brilliant. They could tell you stories of their own. When I started with Marlin and the encounter between Marlin and Santiago, they couldn't understand that because they have never seen sea, but they have seen the forest. So they started asking me questions. How, I'm not able to understand it. Can you tell me some other story? For them, the textbook was just a storybook. Then I said, okay, you better tell me the story. And I inspired them to tell their struggles, their stories, their anonymous heroes, their unsung saga. Once they start to talk about their struggles, their unsung heroes, they were very open. And that's the time when I understood that they're extremely creative and wonderful in narration because they have an eye for details, many of them. They could talk about images. They illustrated with vivid images their story. And one student was telling me, now I think Marlin is almost like a leopard that we find in our tea estate. I'm like, okay, you are connecting a marlin in a sea to a leopard in a tea forest. Okay, fine, great. And then they came up with the story of Old Man and the Forest. And there was a parallel story that was drawn. They are creative. They accept out of the box ideas. I think that's something that works with them a lot.
Thank you, ma'am. There's another question.
In a class of 60 students, how can we inculcate reading habit? Yeah. The moment we take a pledge to come out of the conventional teaching strategy, we can inculcate reading habits. Why can't we have a quiz, for example, with different student groups, divide the text into 4 parts, ask the students to prepare questions from one part each, let them read only that part, and then ask questions to each other. I'm just narrating one simple way of engaging them constructively in reading. Another option, give them, again, group work, give them different images that are from different parts of the story. Ask them to find where those images are going to fit in the story. Also, the most suitable dialogues that will relate to that particular image. They have to figure it out from the story. It can be done even as a pair activity. With very conventional teaching reading strategies, I don't think we can inspire all the 60. I've just illustrated 1 or 2 examples that usually works in my class. Many others were discussed in previous sessions. I have heard, I guess, we could take it into our classrooms as well.
Thank you, ma'am. There's another question from Ms. Anita. Concept map, Amita, concept map drawn or described verbally?
Concept map drawn. Drawing, they don't have a problem because they don't have to use many words. They use diagrams. So concept map drawn, and they're also good with mimicking or copying. They can copy. They can't write properly with grammatically accurate sentences, but they can copy things. They're excellent in that. And they're also very good in remembering and reproducing it. That's how I think they have been successfully completing their exams, but they wouldn't know what they have written. So, of course, when I asked them to draw the concept map, they drew it well. Spelling errors were there, but timelines, almost those things were clear.
Thank you, ma'am. Another question from Mr. Vishnu. What's the best method to make our school children good readers?
Will there be a best method as such? There are many best methods, I guess. I think projection method, I mean, there are so many methods that have been discussed in the previous sessions. I think even Dr. Ilango's sessions, he has come up with split method, projection method. I remember those things. Whatever may be the method that we are using, I guess it's important for us to decide what's the purpose of that method. Is it going to serve the purpose of igniting a curiosity among the school children to start exploring the text? That's the most important factor there. Anything that would trigger the imagination of the child would be the best hook. So we need to identify, and it varies from learner to learner. For example, I have a teenager at home who started reading Harry Potter when he was in class 4 or 5. And the hook was, I gave him Harry Potter stories and stopped at a particular place where he couldn't sit and just listen. I stopped there and he was curious to know what is happening next. So out of sheer necessity, that fellow started reading. Even that works, but that varies from person to person. With these students, it was discussions, debates, whether whatever they have stated is right or wrong. All those kind of techniques worked well with these adult learners. I'm saying worked well with that well in double quote. I'm in the midway of my study. At least I could create a positive attitude. I could remove the fear or aversion towards the reading text. That's all that I could do so far. They haven't read Old Man and the Sea yet, the full version.
I think that is all the question in our discussion. Okay, ma'am.
Okay.
Key takeaways from your session. Give voice to students' thoughts rather than teachers' thoughts. Trigger creative and constructive engagements. Help students to attain confidence. Learning skills, literary skills, and life skills to be incorporated to teach better. Establish connection with the students. Thank you, ma'am. Drawing inferences from your own experiences, you threw light on various strategies to enhance the art of learning. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.